And really what I've sort of like built the framework around is your own personal experiences, observations, and points of view, as well as those of your audience. So those are two separate sides. So I call it original thinking and original research. Research can be this right here, what we're doing. You're interviewing me. This is research that you could extract a bunch of raw material from this podcast, turn it into 3 blog posts, turn it into 6 LinkedIn posts, turn it into 1 edition of your newsletter. And I don't mean transcribing and pasting. I mean taking one idea that we talked about, sprinkling in some of the quotes, but then using that to sort of create a separate discussion or expand deeper on that idea, right?
Hey, and thanks so much for tuning in to Content Briefly. I don't even know how to summarize today's conversation because John Bonini and I covered a lot of ground. We talked about his very early days of podcasting way back in 2015. We talked about his in-house work at Litmus and Databox. We talk about his side project, Some Good Content, which has now become his full-time gig. We talk about what he's hearing from his consulting clients, why and what goes into writing his newsletter, also why you should subscribe to it, which you definitely should because it's quite good. Anyways, John's been in the game a long time. He's contributed a lot of wonderful knowledge and experience to the content marketing industry. He's helped out a ton of people. I have mad respect for John. As always, I really enjoyed this episode, and I hope you do too. Maybe as part of an introduction to folks who don't know you or kind of know your full history, like what were you doing in 2015? What prompted you to start a podcast?
Yeah.
You know, like this is way, way, way before everybody had a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. It was basically like brands, HubSpot and folks like that started to do it. And then like massive influencers, Tim Ferriss, Gary Vee, and then guys like me, you know, Dave Gearhart had a podcast. And I was working in-house for an agency at the time, like right around when I started it. And then like 10 or so, like when that episode came out, July 6th, I was running growth at Litmus. So right around the time, like the first 10 or so episodes, I actually changed jobs, but I was working in-house at an agency when I first started. And honestly, the reason why I started the podcast was I was just looking to connect with people who I admired and people that I thought were really smart and, you know, years ahead of me in the game. And if I like having a podcast was a good excuse to get them to come and hang out with me. And so, and I was just kind of like fascinated with the medium because like blogging had been the thing for so long. Video was still like the barrier to create video, I think, was still really high around that time. Like, you know, again, this is 2015. The iPhones have come a long way in terms of video. Like equipment has gotten cheaper. There's a lot more tools and software.
Yeah.
Right. There was no Loom. Right. Everything was more difficult. So when the audio piece became more accessible, I was just fascinated by it. And I just was like, like maybe I can connect with a lot of people that I admire and have conversations that I want to have. And if I want to have them, maybe other people would want to listen and they could kind of be a fly on the wall type of thing. And I wasn't coming at it from like a monetization standpoint. In fact, I look back and think like, how dumb was I? Because I was at one point I was number 8 on the business charts on iTunes, which you can't even sniff.
That's
now.
wild.
Like,
that's so cool.
And Inc. magazine like wrote an article, top marketing podcast you should follow. Louder Than Words was on there.
Whoa. And
if I was thinking in terms of like, oh, let me get sponsors, and I just wasn't, again, it was early, right? I mean, people weren't doing this besides the, you know, the bigger folks. So I wasn't coming at it from a monetization standpoint, trying to make money. It was as pure of a motivation as you could have. Like I just wanted to have conversations with people I found interesting and use it to create like good content. That was really it.
That's so cool. That's so cool. You know, I just saw it in Dave Gearhart's Exit 5 newsletter this morning. He was talking about like, if your employees are building personal brands, let them. Yeah. It's kind of like the gist of it.
Yeah.
Was there any tension back then? Like you're working in-house as a marketer, you're doing this on the side, sort of building up a personal brand, although maybe we didn't think of it like that back then. Was there any tension between those two things?
Some. I think the lines can get blurred, right? Especially because the podcast wasn't through any of my employers, right? So it's different. Like if I was hosting a podcast for the brand versus myself, and then I'm promoting. So the lines are sort of blurred there, right? Because traditionally, you know, I think before the last 10 years, right? Like you created work for your employer and that was kind of it. But then this whole creator movement started to happen, and now it's people are creating on the side. They have their own newsletters, which I think is smart. Even if you never plan to go solo or the self-employed route, it's just a good way to never have to apply for a job again, right? Build an audience, become known for a specific expertise. So yeah, I think there was definitely times where I think there was conversations that happened because of it early on. It was early days. I will say that when I got to Databox, there wasn't, because our CEO there, he got it right, and I think he saw the value and benefit of having somebody who's very public with sharing their expertise, and they generate a following, and right. So I think he got it. Just inherently kind of understood it. CEO of Databox was a former VP at HubSpot inbound. So like he got it, right? He understood the benefit of attracting people to you and what that could do for the brand. But yeah, I think times are different now, where I would hope brands are and companies are more understanding and see the sort of ancillary benefit. Like I remember recently, somebody commented on a post. I think it was about Databox. I don't remember who posted it, if it was Pete Caputo or me or Jeremiah at Databox, but somebody commented and was like, the whole reason I knew who Databox was just from following John on LinkedIn. And then I ended up checking it out. And so like for every one person that says that, there's probably a lot more, right? And I think that it's hard to measure the benefit of it. And I think what most brands maybe look at is like, they're out here talking about things other than our company and our product.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, but they're building up trust and authority. You can't buy that, right? And so I think it should be encouraged. I just think brands also think about it the wrong way. They're like, oh, we're trying to create in-house creators. Talking about your product and service all day is not going to do that.
Yeah.
You have to let them. Yeah, it's a whole thing. But yeah, I mean, to answer your original question, I think there was some tension, only because just the lines were blurred between like, this thing is not ours, it's yours, and you're talking about it on, like people are going to think you don't work here, and that conversation came up certainly over the years.
Yeah. It's interesting how all that has evolved, and I feel like the creator thing now has this new layer of monetization, which is, I think, for some people actually the focus.
Yeah,
that's where I think it starts to get confusing. That's sort of a whole nother thing. I want to maybe just catch people up to speed on all the other things that have happened since July 6th, 2015. Like what, you were at Litmus, you were at Databox. I might be missing one in there. And then now you've gone off on your own to run some good content. Could you just like kind of fill in at 9 years, obviously like a lot of space there, but like, could you give us a summary of what's going on in that almost decade?
Yeah. So starting with July 7th, 2015 now. Yeah. So like I said, shortly around the time, funny enough, I had Justine Jordan, who ran marketing at Litmus, on Louder Than Words, the podcast. In fact, we can see like around the time where I might've gotten hired, because I had her on, and Justine was episode 4. So that was April of 2015. So I had Justine, who ran marketing at Litmus, on the podcast. And about a month later, she reached out to me and said, hey, like, we're having internal conversations. We've been mostly bootstrapped. We haven't really focused on optimization and stuff over the years. We've kind of just done content and published what we thought was right. And it's allowed us to grow to where we're at, but we want to have a more deliberate approach. Would you be interested in talking about a growth role here? And I was like, oh yeah, absolutely. And so, I went up to Boston a few times. I spoke at Unbounce's conversion conference up there. They came and supported me and watched, and we had dinner together, and that ended up turning into a role at Litmus. And I ran growth there for a little over 2 years. Right after I joined, they raised $50 million of private equity. So that'll get you thrown right into the growth sort of, pool and mindset very quickly. And that was just an invaluable experience, just going from the agency world into the SaaS space, raising money, presenting to the board, having to tie everything back, as best as you could in terms of attribution. And that was really like I felt like an MBA, honestly, just because, again, we raised money really quickly. We'd have quarterly board or monthly board meetings I was called into some of them at times because I ran growth. And so I present numbers to the board, I'd answer questions, and just, that back and forth and having to experience that, I think was invaluable just for, the rest of my career.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Really different to like come up with a marketing campaign, run it,
Right.
but then have to go and report to a board.
And
like that feels very intimidating.
It's very intimidating. I remember like, being in my, because I live in Connecticut, so I would drive up, and I was like getting off the exit one time, throwing a handful of Tums in my mouth because my stomach was
right.
my stomach was in knots. And, I'm driving around the financial district trying to find a parking garage, ended up parking under, in this parking garage under the building, and it just kept going down, 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 down. I was like, where am I going? And I just remember being so stressed, and like I said, my stomach was in, and this would happen almost every time. But like, I remember thinking the questions that they're asking me, this is so like, very few people at the level I was at the time get access to these types of conversations and people.
Yeah.
And so I just remember internalizing all the questions they were asking and be like, this is super helpful for me in terms of how to think about the work going forward and how to prioritize, and just how to manage my team. Right. And ask them similar questions before we get further down the road with certain projects. So that whole experience, even though it was like super stressful and anxiety inducing, was just invaluable. Even now, like on the consulting side, when I'm working with, like I understand, like if I'm, working with a CMO, I can empathize with they have to go report to the executives, or maybe they have to be in a board meeting. So I get it. Like I've been in the seat before, and I think that's such an important part of being an effective consultant, is having genuine empathy and being like, yeah, I know, I get it. And describing what they're going through. And they're like, yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, that was,
that's cool.
That was a fun experience. And Litmus was like their content. They were one of, I talk about content brands. Litmus was a content brand around that time, just their approach to content and what they wrote about, how they approached it. That was sort of like a crash course in working with Justine Jordan. And I think Justine, yeah, because you worked with Litmus for a little while when I was there.
A little while, yeah. I did some ghostwriting for Paul Farnell, the CEO.
And Justine used to tell everybody, like, she used to call that Jimmy Daly content. We need more Jimmy Daly content, like the way you wrote, because it was more personal experiences, points of view. Like you were ahead of the game, whereas now I feel like that's becoming critical. We'll probably get into that after. But back then, like we didn't write a lot of stuff like that. And so when you came in and did a few posts with Paul, the founder, I remember Justine being like, we need to do more Jimmy Daly content, like as a team. So that's where I first heard of you. And so, yeah, Justine was like, she would say no to the founders if they were like, hey, we want you to promote this new feed. And if she didn't feel like it was a value add to the audience, I've never met somebody who was so protective of the audience. A lot of people say they are, but she fostered a whole community around email and knew what pains they were having and just understood them at a really visceral level. And she was super protective of putting out anything that would sort of withdraw from that bank of trust. And so she would, like I posted about the best marketers or troublemakers recently on LinkedIn. And I was thinking about her because, sometimes it would rub people the wrong way, or they'd be like, oh, Justine, she could be difficult to work with. And she wasn't. Like she just had she knew what the audience wanted. And if it didn't reach the bar for her for quality, or just like this is a utility for the audience, it wasn't going out. Like
how great is that?
First day there.
That is evergreen too.
Yeah. My first day there, I spent a week up in Cambridge. And I said, Justine, like, she was like, what are some things you think like about our blog? And I was like, well, first of all, because I'm going off what the CEO was telling me. He's like, yeah, we need more, we get a lot of people reading our content. We need to get them back to the site. And I was like, well, are you sharing, like when you publish a new blog, are you sharing it with all the subscribers? No. I was like, oh, that seems like low hanging fruit. So I told Justine, I was like, we should set up in which, all the listeners out there that are going to be like, oh my God, like this was commonplace at the time. Like set up an autoresponder. Every time a blog post goes out, it automatically sends it to all of our blog subscribers. Like, why don't we do that? And she looked at me and she was like, over my dead body, and, smiling, but I was like, okay. And she's like, we're not doing that. And I was like, okay. And so like right away I knew, like, all right, we really got to come at this, not from a transactional standpoint, but what will be best for the audience, what's going to help us continue to build trust, gain authority, because that's what helped Litmus, bootstrap to 20 million. I mean,
Wow.
in like
That was before
4 or 5 years. Insane.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. There's nothing better than working with someone who feels real conviction over their work. And you don't come across it all that often. And it's like type 2 fun.
Yeah.
Working with someone with that type of conviction, because it's like sometimes the day-to-day of it's like it's so much harder to do it right and to like respect the audience, and like, don't just do the hacky thing because other people do it or whatever. But then like that type of work is so much more satisfying.
It is. Yeah, it is. And stuff, you learn a lot just by working with somebody like that. And you learn to, heighten your own standards. And so, yeah, that whole experience was great. And then I used to reach out to Justine when I was running marketing at Databox, because I found myself doing the same thing, right? Like getting into arguments with people at the company, or saying like, no, this isn't gonna, or, even having conversations with Pete, and we would butt heads on certain things, and I would be stubborn about something, he'd be stubborn about something. And I would talk to Justine every now and then, and I'd be like, I get it. Like, I get where you were coming from. And like, also that seat, like being in that seat, it could be hard because you're pissing people off. But like the North Star is the audience, and building up that trust and authority. And you can't do that by being super transactional. You just can't.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that experience at Litmus was just invaluable. And again, something I still hold with me now.
That's really cool.
And yeah, learning sort of like to work within those parameters.
That's awesome. And so then from there you go to Databox. You spent, I don't know, 4 years there?
6 years.
Oh my gosh, 6 years. Okay.
Yeah.
What's like the arc of that experience, like?
Yeah. I mean,
and I know obviously very difficult to condense 6 years into a couple minutes, but like, I was just curious, like, how young was the company when you started? What type of marketing stuff are you doing? Because you're leading all marketing, not just content, although I know content was a key part of all this. Like, how does that stuff evolve over those couple of years?
Yeah. So they were doing about 300K ARR when I joined, which was scary, right? I had never joined a company that early before. But Pete Caputa, the CEO who I had known since my days working at an agency, because he ran the partner program, started the partner program at HubSpot. So I knew Pete really well. I trusted him. Like we talked, I understood like his vision. And so like, I was like, yeah, I really wanted to, something I learned at Litmus was you could tell the people who were there for the first million, for the first 5 million, for the first 10 million, they just have a wisdom that you can't attain by reading a blog post or reading a book. You have to live it. And I wanted that. And so I felt like, okay, Databox is this opportunity where I can join at the ground floor, work with somebody like Pete, who I admired, and report directly to him. He built a $100 million business inside of HubSpot in the partner program there. So like,
oh, wow.
Imagine all the things wild. I could learn from him. And then also see Databox hit the first 1 million. And what does it take to get there? See them hit 5. What does that take? And so on. And so I was like, all right, like it was nerve wracking because they were, it was so early. But I joined because, again, I wanted that experience, and I wanted to gain sort of that wisdom that I had observed at Litmus, the folks who were there from maybe not day 1, but day 300 or so. Like, they were there in the early days and saw Litmus hit 1 million and hit it. And so that's why I joined it. So it was super early, and there was one content marketer on the team at the time. So I kind of came in and inherited like one direct report, and there was no budget for paid. We didn't have a ton of resources. So like, doing a video series or all this stuff, like we had to find a creative way to come at content if we were going to break through, and it was going to work. And so that's where we sort of like landed on that, like a research approach, and being reporters, surveying our audience, asking them the questions rather than trying to be the experts ourselves, and then sort of like report on the results. And then what ended up happening was that all the people that contributed to our content would share it. They would talk about it. They would feature it in their own content. And then that just compounds the more you do that. And so we built a really tight process over the years there and became known for a very specific approach to content.
Yeah.
And that allowed us to break through. I mean, we were, ranking up there with some of the bigger players that have been around much longer than us for content when they said it was so much harder to do that. And I think that, yeah, we grew off organic, like that's in content. But we did it differently. We didn't just have a spreadsheet of keywords and said, let's write about these things and do traditional how-tos. We did it our way, the way we wanted to do it, the way we thought would work. And it did. It really helped us build up an audience. And yeah, so I think there are around 8 million ARR now, or just over. And yeah, I mean, they didn't raise any money when I was there for 6 years. And yeah, it was just like a crash course in doing a lot with very little, seeing the company hit those milestones I was talking about. And yeah, if Litmus was an MBA, I get the Databox too, and working with Pete and just seeing all the ways the teams can work together and what has to be done to get you to 0 to 1 million. And then from 1 to 2 is much different.
Yeah.
1 to 5, it looks a lot different. Like everything has to change, and it's painful, and it could be really frustrating. But again, like I kept reminding myself while I was in it, like this is what this earned experience is not supposed to be easy, all the time. So it was fun. And again, like
That's cool.
Yeah.
6 years and no fundraising is a long time. And like from a content
Yeah.
perspective, I can imagine like you dream up the strategy when you first get there, you start executing, and you can probably see off into the future. Like, I know this is going to work, but it's going to take a while,
Yeah.
But then without like a influx of cash to make it go faster
Or hire more people.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I would imagine that like, it's a test of endurance at some point.
It is. That's a good way to put it.
Can we keep doing this for long enough for it to pay off?
It really does become a test of, are you going to get bored? Or, especially early on, like, can you handle publishing kind of in obscurity? Like not a lot of people really knew who Databox was. And yeah, you're going to publish some stuff. You'll get some initial traction. And then after that, nobody's going to talk about you again. Cause again, you're still really early in the process. And you have to do the same thing when it starts working over and over to the point where you kind of get bored, but you're not raising money. You're not hiring a bunch of other people that increases your capabilities as a team. So you really just have to find ways to continue to stay like, how do we keep this interesting? What are some additional things we could add to this process without needing to add headcount? You're constantly trying to keep budget low for everything, freelancers. And if I worked with freelancers whose rates were much higher than what we were paying them, but because we had a process for getting quotes and basically what they would just do is take those quotes and create a narrative around it. Like they were willing to work for a little less. And so we worked with some great writers, but had to find creative ways to like, okay, we can't afford to pay you your normal rate, but like, this is our process and how we think it might not take you as much time. You might be able to do 2 or 3 of these instead of just one. And that and so, yeah, I mean, there was so much to learn beyond just the company growing. It was just how to operate at that, with those growth aspirations, but with the resources of being a bootstrap team and having to grow off profit. And yeah, man, the how did you describe it? Like exhausting or endurance? A perfect way to describe it.
It's exactly what it is. Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of my early days at Animals, which is like 2016. I think I was the 6th or 7th person there. And it's like, you're writing content, you're on calls with customers. Yeah. You may need to like clean up the books this month, and like you might have to restock the toilet paper in the bathroom. Whatever needs to be done, right. You're just doing it. But you feel this, or at least what I felt was like this really, like the camaraderie of it was awesome.
Yeah, because everyone else is the same. Yeah. And it's very punk rock. You're just trying to get noticed. Like, right? You want to you want to be discovered. You want people to know who you are. And so like everybody's kind of bought into that. And yeah, things get complicated after the fact, once the company starts growing and things change. But yeah, those early days are, it really has a way of building culture and all those early people, I think you're all going through it together.
Absolutely. And it also really hones your skills if you want to be a consultant later.
Yeah.
So while you're at Databox, you start Some Good Content. Probably, I don't know the exact date, but I would imagine it's not kind of like around the same time that I started Superpath. Same ballpark, 2020-ish.
22, yeah. August 4th, 2020 is when I launched the Patreon.
Nice. I like these specific dates.
Yeah, I mean, you did it, so I was like, all right, I got to throw out some dates here.
And you ran that as a side project for a while. You've now gone on to work on it full time, which includes the membership, newsletters, some consulting. Like, paint the picture of Some Good Content.
Well, that was just so, if Louder Than Words was a way for me to have conversations with people and learn, Some Good Content was a way for me to share everything I had learned from the agency days, from running growth at a, high growth SaaS startup that raised a ton of money, to working at Databox on, sort of like that bootstrapped mentality. And I just was like, I have a lot to share. And, I'm basically going to put together this resource where other content marketers may be in similar positions or earlier in their careers or whatever, right? Just want to riff on this stuff and hear what's worked for me. And that's really how I positioned it. Is like, this is the stuff that's worked for me. I always hated absolute advice. Like, this is what you need to do. So it was more so like, these are my systems. These are my processes. These are some of the things that I found to be helpful and effective. And, I just threw up a quick Patreon, thought maybe I'd get 100 people to join or something like that, which would have been awesome. And at its height, I had 600 members, paying members. And so it grew to be a lot bigger than I thought. And with that came a lot of people being like, hey, that thing you talked about, do you know anybody that helps do that? Do you offer consulting around that? And at the time, I had a full-time job and I was like, no, I don't, but I would refer them to people maybe that I knew. And then after a while, I think that opportunity just became too great to continue to ignore. And and then it sort of just parlayed all my experience that I've had up until this point in my career to, all right, like, how can I help other, companies, software companies, and even, worked with some agencies as well, build their content brand, like, meaning move beyond this sort of like impersonal, mundane, listicle how-to content it's not as effective now because the bar to create it has been lowered so far, right? And the importance of creating content with that combines sort of your own internal experience, expertise, points of view, insights with that of your audience, like that is what you see working. That worked for me at Databox. I saw that work at Litmus, and then other brands that I admire, people like Wistia, and so just helping. Like, I want to help other brands do that and sort of implement those systems. And so really, I think the time just, I don't know if it's ever right. Didn't feel maybe right at the time, but as good as it's going to feel in terms of like taking that leap and trying to make it work on your own. So last summer. So, or maybe, June of last year, June of 2023 was when I finally took the leap and went full time on the consulting and sort of like its combination of creator and consulting.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because I really like how you still do both, because every now and then you'll notice some experienced, smart marketing person become a consultant, and then you kind of like lose track of, like, they're so busy doing consulting work that there's no public output. You don't really know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I feel like, or at least from my perspective, it's very smart to do both, like continue sharing the knowledge because you're accumulating more of it as you go. And then it kind of also, at the very least, like, it's lead gen, but potentially it fuels this community of paying members. Like, it gets people on a newsletter list, which you could sell ads to. Like, that's a whole business that could run alongside the consulting.
Exactly. Or on its own someday. And I think I need to stay close to the work too, from, myself personally, just to, like, I still create, right? I'm not a consultant who goes off and I don't create anymore. I haven't written a blog post in years, that kind of thing. So I think staying close to the work and honestly, just flat out, I enjoy it. Like there's a part of me that needs to create. I need to write this newsletter. I need to have this podcast with folks that I admire. And if I don't have sort of like the desired fulfillment. Like if I was just doing the client work and not creating at all, like it would feel like something was missing. So
Yeah.
I kind of need to do both. And like you said, yeah, it helps to build up. When I have people that book calls potentially to consult, they're using my language back to me. I think we have an opportunity to be the content brand in our space. And I was like, so the level of trust there from people reading your work, just like observing you over months or even years, right? Like you can't, the impact of that is immeasurable. So yeah, I mean, there's really no reason not to. And so that's like a big reason why I've stuck with it. And creating has given me everything I've had in my career up to this point. So why would I stop now? Right.
Yeah.
So
That's cool, man. That's
yeah.
really cool. What are you seeing on the consulting side these days? Are SaaS companies having like the same old content problems, or are you discovering new stuff? Like last 12 months, I feel like a lot has
Yeah.
changed in content. And I am curious because I feel like I see some of both. Like I see some people like forging new paths, and I feel like I see others kind of refining the same system from a few years ago.
Yeah. It's a combination of both things. Like I think you're seeing a lot of fear because of what's happened with AI, and it's going to become a lot easier for people to copy our content. In some cases, I have people who come to me and say that our competitors are copying our content, and they know that the way that they've been doing it isn't going to necessarily be the thing that continues to be effective, meaning just, yeah, spreadsheet of keywords. Let's just write about these things, hope they rank. And so I think there's a lot of just uncertainty in, is this going to continue to work, or it's just not working as well as it has. And so I've had a lot of people articulate that, but then I just have a lot of people articulate, basically around two main challenges, which is like, I had somebody describe it recently to me that we just want our audience to have good feelings about us already when they come and talk to sales, or if they see our ad, whether it's a search ad or a display ad. And we know to do that, we have to create content that's not transactional, like search content. We need to create something better, but they can't quite articulate what that means. But they know that, the way that they've always done it, or the way everybody else has been doing it, isn't the way that they want to do it anymore. And then the two more specific things that I hear is like, they find it really hard to get subject matter expertise in the content because the people internally who have it don't have time to contribute. And so they're relying on junior level marketers to basically fake expertise and write these blog articles like everybody's always written, 10 ways to do this, how to do this, written by somebody with, 2 years of experience in the field. And, that sort of lacks that acumen. And then the other piece is they don't see sort of like their audience represented in the content, meaning this isn't what we hear. This isn't what customers are talking about. Have you listened to sales calls? Maybe you should jump on some support. Maybe you should answer some support tickets. Like companies are asking marketers to do those things because they're not seeing the audience sort of represented in the content. And so like, they don't feel like the expertise is there in the content. They don't feel like the audience is represented in the content. Those are two things just for me reading between the lines, I consistently see as challenges. And both of all that stuff can be solved in sort of like the same approach, which is, part of the content brand framework that I sort of like consult people on and help them implement. But yeah, I would say a lot of it is just like not wanting to do things the way that they've always done. There's some element of like, we want to be everyone's favorite. We want to be who they talk about. We want them to bookmark our stuff. We want them to like reach out to us if we didn't send a newsletter this week and be like, hey, did I miss it? Like, when is that episode going up? Or when is that newsletter going out? They're all articulating something similar around that. Like, we want people to care about us, and we want like a real audience, not just this transactional, you searched for this thing, we offer this thing, here it is, come by. And so there's a lot of that. They all articulate it in slightly different ways, but that's essentially what the folks that I want to work with and the folks that I have been, or the folks that have reached out to book calls, that's sort of like what I'm hearing. There seems to be this like wave that's built up of things have to change, or our content's not good enough, or nobody, like, it ranks, but people don't love us. Like when, I had one person tell me, like, when people talk about our space on LinkedIn, no one mentions us, but they rank for a bunch of stuff. They drive a ton of organic traffic, but nobody talks about them. They don't feel like people care to that extent. And if they want to continue growing, they feel like that's what they need. So it's, like I said, it's articulated in a lot of different, somebody told me like, a lot of our content ranks, I just hope our customers don't read it. And so like they all articulate it.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people articulate it in different ways, but that's sort of like what I'm hearing from the folks I talk to.
Do you feel like the content brand framework has fundamentally changed over the past couple of years? Or is it, you're tweaking little things based on how channels change and algorithms change and things like that?
I mean, I think the core tenets of it are just like they don't change, right? And really what I've sort of like built the framework around is your own personal experiences, observations, and points of view, as well as those of your audience. So those are two separate sides. So I call it original thinking and original research. Research can be this right here, what we're doing. You're interviewing me. This is research that you could extract a bunch of raw material from this podcast, turn it into 3 blog posts, turn it into 6 LinkedIn posts, turn it into 1 edition of your newsletter. And I don't mean transcribing and pasting. I mean taking one idea that we talked about, sprinkling in some of the quotes, but then using that to sort of create a separate discussion or expand deeper on that idea, right? And that being sort of the starting point for your content, not a list of keywords, but an insight from somebody who's actually in the field, or an insight from an expert inside the company that maybe you interview for your podcast, or you interview separately, just, plain old interview. But that needs to be the starting point, especially with AI and all this stuff. Is like, it's too easy for anybody to just write another, here's what you should do. Like, I'm going to talk at the audience and just tell them what they should do. Don't do that. Like, show them what other people are doing, like real people out in the field that are just like them. Like, cover those stories, tell them what they're doing, and then also use the expertise inside of your company and like, what are their experiences? What have they observed? And build content around that. That's really the core tenets of content brand. And all the people that you see who I sort of consider content brands, Wistia, Spark, Toro, Litmus, they might not know that they're doing that, but that's what they've always done. Look at Wistia's content. It's very much built on their own geekery around video and the gear that they use and how they outfitted a station wagon to be a mobile video studio. And then places like Litmus were very community driven and featured a lot of email geeks, as they call them, from their audience in their content, and would interview them and have them present. And so it's always existed. I just think it's become even more critical now. Like, it's always allowed brands like them to stand out, but like now I just think it's even more critical for brands to sort of follow that approach, because you really need to focus on creating content that no one else can copy. And the only way you could do that is it has to be personal, or it has to be personal to you or to members of your audience. Use their experiences to tell the stories. Sprinkle in keywords as what they should be, the seasoning after the fact, instead of like having the keywords be the meat, the side, the dessert, and everything. So yeah.
How different is the coaching versus execution? Because I'm imagining like you explain this to a consulting client and they say, hell yeah, we want that.
Yeah.
And you just articulated this thing that we've been like trying to figure out, but like haven't found words for. Now we've got it. Do you find that given the framework, they'll do it? Or do you need to be kind of like pushing them along to make sure that the little things are executed on?
It's sort of like guided implementation. Like, the first thing I do is I'll interview them and some of the leaders at their company. And I have a set of questions that I ask to get at what their unique points of view and observations are. Like, asking them questions like, what's a point of view you have on the market that others don't have? What's a point of view that exists in the market that is common sort of knowledge that you don't agree with, that you strongly oppose? And so I have a whole set of questions to sort of extract out what their unique observation experience, just sort of their unique editorial narrative, like what it even is, so that we could sort of then go from there and build out, okay, so what IP do we currently have that we could leverage to sort of present that? You have a podcast, great. We might need to sort of adjust the positioning of it because it's just like a basic, they hop on, they do an interview, and there's no real like big question that they're exploring. So it's more guided implementation, like working with their team, helping them uncover things. I have a sort of editorial roadmap, inside of Notion to help them like take one piece of content and, say like a podcast episode, extract out 3 to 5 insights that were shared in it, use like an angle matrix that I have to come up with different, articles they could write on their blog, different posts they could put on LinkedIn, different ways they could roll all of that up into a newsletter. So it creates this whole like flywheel for them from like, for example, podcast to blog to social to email newsletter. And we build that whole content flow. So it's very much guided. I'm not just like giving them the steps and being like, go do it. It's more so guided implementation. I'm not writing the content for them, but I'm sort of helping them through the process of implementing the program inside their company.
Got it. That makes sense. Really cool, man. You've done a lot of good work for the content industry in your career. So
I appreciate that. Well,
we
coming
thank
from you, yeah. Likewise, dude. Like I feel like you and I are kindred spirits in many ways when it comes to content.
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, I have learned from you for a long time, and I respect the hell out of the work you do. So
likewise,
I would strongly encourage people to go subscribe to the newsletter. I mean, I don't know if that's like your main call to action, but like go read the newsletter, because so much of this ends up in there. And this is not you just like dreaming up ideas that might be cool. It's like stuff you're learning in the trenches with customers, things you're actually advising them on. So,
well, I'm practicing what I preach. It's my sort of observations, but then also the folks that come on my podcast, I talk about like my favorite things that I've heard from them and what that all means. So I practice what I preach, right? Like, and what I'm saying, the companies that I work with should do. So that, the Louder, it's up to this point been called the Good Content Newsletter. It's actually being rebranded to Louder Than Words to align with the podcast and just have that be sort of one brand. But come join. We'd love to have you.
Cool. We'll put links in there, and let's shout out the podcast too. I'm going to be a guest on in a few weeks. So go listen to that one. But you took a break from the podcast and now you've revived it.
Long break.
It seems like it just fits perfectly within this new kind of portfolio of stuff you're putting together.
Yeah. It's 7 years I didn't publish it. And then for the most part, I thought it was like, okay, that was something cool that I did earlier in my career, but like I've moved on. And, I had podcasts for the brands I was working for. And if I ever started another one, I just thought it would be something different. But then once I went off on my own, I was, like the Louder Than Words concept at the time, what it meant was talking to people who created content that was louder than just words on paper. They weren't just writing words. It was more than that. They weren't just writing keywords and right, like their work spoke louder. It stood out. And at the time I was like, this is even more relevant now with like literally words are commoditized. Like any of us could get a ChatGPT article written in minutes or we're all, spreadsheet of keywords and that's all we're writing and everyone else is doing the same thing. And I'm like, Louder Than Words as a concept is even more relevant now than it was in 2015. So one of the first things when I decided to go solo was like, I need to bring this back. And it was like buried in SoundCloud somewhere. I had to go get the hard, like
awesome.
Somehow I was still paying for SoundCloud, which actually worked out because I was still able to get in, access my, the RSS link, everything. And so I just moved everything over to Transistor and started just, all right, like my last episode was 7 years ago. Here's the next one. Right. So, but it just feels good to have it back for me. It's very personal to me. It's like the first thing I ever really did on the side. And I think it changed my career and my life in many ways. So I'm like, it feels good to have it back. And it's like this, like, I don't know, it just feels good. Like I'm supposed to be doing this podcast. Yeah. So
That's awesome, man. I'm so happy. One of the cool things that's happening in content right now is that things that are old are new again.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like everyone's sort of like, oh my God, does content work anymore? And it's like, well, actually, yeah, it does. Just do all the things that you're supposed to do, like that we talked about like 15 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Still
applicable.
Good. Still good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even more so now. Yeah. It's probably more important now that you do those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, John, thanks so much for your time, man. We'll have links to Some Good Content, newsletter, podcast. Everything will be in show notes. People, please go check it out. And we'd love to have you on again sometime, John.
I appreciate you, Jimmy. Thanks for having me on.
Take care, man.